So the Death Note one-shot manga's come out, and it's basically a sequel to Death Note, which is a highly renowned series. So, needless to say, expectations are very high for this, and I gotta say that I was very cautiously optimistic, because so many sequels or things that come after other properties that come out have a tendency to kind of retroactively change things or kind of be retconny in certain ways. So I was very worried about that, but I'm very pleasantly surprised to say that this manga is not that at all. It's just a straight up kind of follow up, basically, because again, Ryuk is bored. So, and speaking of expectations, like, you look at the cover for this with this fantastic art. You got Ryuk, you got this red apple, and you got this kid right here, which is a very nice character design. And you're thinking, who is this? And how can they possibly live up to Light Turner? Wink, wink. So, who really, like, what character could possibly fill the shoes of Light in a Death Note series? Like, it's almost like you got to take it into a new or interesting direction. And basically that's what this one shot does. And I was very pleasantly surprised in many areas, but a few things that I kind of question about it, and we'll get into those as we go through it. But of course, we open up with Ryuk being hungry for apples and bored out of his mind. And we see just the freaking ravenous nature of this dude in this panel right here with his sharp teeth, the saliva just freaking flailing all over the place, the sound effects, and the apple just getting ripped to shreds. And Ryuk says, "You know what? I've been bored." And this is 2013, by the way. So there's a little bit of a time jumping around going on here. And he's like, "I'm gonna find somebody just like Light Yagami, and I want to do that again, and I want to eat all the apples I want." So he goes out and he ends up at Tanaka's house, and I'm thinking, okay, so how did he find him? Oh, it's 2019. It's been 6 years. So have they been working together for 6 years? And did it take him that long to find him after 6 years? But turns out he redoes his memory because he touches him with the Death Note. And this panel right here with the close-up of his eyes, just everything flooding into his mind, and you actually feel like everything's flooding into his mind that in regard to the Death Note. And some of his plans are kind of interesting. What do you guys think of his plan? Do you think it makes sense? Let me know down in the comments. But he mentions that it's been 2 years. So 2 years from now would be 2017, which is 4 years after Ryuk left. So did it take Ryuk 4 entire years? Like, what was he doing in those 4 years? Was he actually just actively looking for somebody for 4 long years? And I think Tanaka must have been in elementary school then, because in 2017, Tanaka's in middle school when they meet, which is where we go next. We have another time jump back where the faculty is kind of expositing. And that's kind of how Death Note is. There's a lot of explaining what's going on through the dialogue. This very Death Note-ish. And it's not, usually in a lot of things that would be kind of a bad thing, like, stop explaining so much, like, show it within the actions of the characters and everything like that. But especially in the confines of a one-shot manga, it's really difficult to do, which makes me wish that this was kind of like a mini series, sort of, because I really wish that we had more expansion on the character and this story, because I think it's really interesting the direction that they take this in. But the faculty is basically explaining that, hey, this is the smartest kid 3 years running. So basically he's been the smartest kid since 2014, a year after Ryuk left. These, I love how these 2 pages are just in stark contrast to each other. You got the faculty just raving about this school, and he's like, this kid is so smart. And then you have Tanaka sitting there with like a terrible grade, and he's like, I'm so stupid, I'm so bad at English, blah blah blah. And he's sitting in this park just being down on himself, and then he gets hit with the Death Note, and boom, there's Ryuk just hovering over him like this freaking grotesque nightmare. And I love the angle on this and the perspective, and I love especially Tanaka's horrified look in this panel, his wide eyes. Freaking classic, man. And Ryuk's like, hey, I hear you're pretty smart, which makes sense. I mean, if Ryuk has been hovering around, he might have caught wind. I mean, he's specifically looking for smart kids. So he's kind of like, hey, your teachers say you're really smart. And he's like, no, I'm not really smart. And it's really interesting because if you, like, at this point, I'm thinking, okay, so he is really smart. He's just like really bad at like test taking, you know, because a lot of times, like, you'll be really good at school. If you're like in middle school or high school or even college, then you might understand how it feels to be like you have the knowledge in your brain and you know it, but then when you go to sit down at a test, like the knowledge just won't come to you for some reason. Then you do terrible on the test and ergo do way worse in the class than you would have otherwise, but you still have that knowledge. That's kind of what I was thinking here. But another twist, it actually turns out that Tanaka is smart. Like, he's not necessarily smart. He's probably just average, maybe below average, but he is very smart in terms of brain games or puzzle kind of stuff, because he does like IQ stuff and brain games and stuff on his apps on his phone. I thought that was super interesting because, you know, you could be really, really dumb in like many different areas and like a freaking genius in just one area. And it's really interesting dialogue that's leading the plot, where Tanaka says, you know, smart people are actually making changes in the world for the future. I'm just a dumb idiot who flunked English, basically. So Ryuk's like, are you an idiot? And he's kind of just like looking at him super close. And I love this panel of Ryuk and his freaking googly eyes and Tanaka's just sick face right there. Such good. And then of course this panel, very detailed look on Ryuk, and it's really good to see Ryuk again. And of course, I think it would be interesting to have like another one-shot, maybe a mini-series actually going into the details of the Shinigami world, or maybe it's just better left to mystery. I don't know. What do you guys think? He's like, maybe, you know, the puzzle smarts are what's needed. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, looking at things from multiple perspectives and thinking 2 steps ahead, and what have you. But anyway, they go back to his apartment and they're like, okay, here's the power of Kira. And he's like, oh my God, I've learned about this guy in ethics classes and stuff. And I'm thinking, this is very interesting. Like, we got this time skip and we're actually seeing the effects that Kira's had on the world. And he's like this, which makes sense. He's become this like textbook like figurehead, and he's in ethics classes and everything, which makes a lot of sense because like he got rid of a lot of bad people, but he did it in a bad way. So it's like, okay, where's the kind of balance in that, and where would you stand if you were Kira and you had the Death Note, and this kid is kind of plunged into this decision. And of course, Ryuk kind of fills him in on the past and Kira's story and everything like that. And we're kind of given more like world building, where the world is at after the whole Kira incident. Like, everything is under surveillance. So Tanaka takes a bunch of time to think, and he eventually has Ryuk. And this is what I was talking about earlier, if I remembered to mention that. Ryuk plays a very active role in this compared to the original, if I remember correctly. Of course, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember Ryuk being so active. So we cut back to the present day, and he's like, okay, so I can go through with my plan. And I'm thinking, why did you need to wait 2 years? Did you want to just think about it or plan it out longer, but then you gave up ownership of the Death Note, so you completely forgot about it? And so he's like, yeah, we can sell it now. I'm thinking, why now and not in the past? I'm not making that connection. If anybody knows, help me out in the comments, please. So Ryu goes to the news station that's nearby and holds up the piece of paper to tell everybody that it's for auction. And I'm feeling like this, this whole thing like really sells the mass hysteria that this one thing causes. Like, people are freaked out, and then you see what's his name, Matsuda, and he's one of the only people that can see Ryuk, and he sees him on the TV, and I love how hysterical everybody gets from just this little thing. But I'm at the same time I'm thinking, like, everybody is like so quick to believe this guy. I mean, granted, the paper's floating in the middle of the newsroom, and you know, I think people would be more quick to judge the news people from putting on this charade for ratings than it actually being like Kira's power. But then Matsuda, like later on, like gives way more credibility to it being actually Kira's power when he goes to the TV station. So I don't know, they do cover their bases, but I feel like there should have been a little bit more skepticism, I suppose, in there. But of course, like I said, it's pretty constrained since it's just a one shot. So finally we get to, of course, people are bidding left and right, like crap tons of money. It's insane. So finally we get to Nier, and he has this crazy looking Ryuk like puzzle. And I'm like, whoa, man, what? Like, where did you get this thing? And how and why? I mean, he says he's trying to build some facial recognition software, but I'm like, why? Like, there's 3 people who can actually recognize him or see him. So are you thinking that Shinigami are just gonna invade and there's just gonna be death notes everywhere? But anyway, I'm glad to see Nier here. Although his role in this is essentially just to be somebody who figures out what Tanaka's doing, even though nothing comes of it, really. So I enjoyed that dynamic, and I enjoyed somebody figuring out what Tanaka's doing. But I think the point of this chapter is mostly just to say, hey, this is something else that could happen with the Death Note, and this is kind of how it could go in this day and age with the internet and everything. So for what it was, I liked it. And Nier, in terms of his role, I did enjoy him for the most parts, even though this facial recognition statue is very interesting, and I liked how he called him Akira, essentially Akira. So essentially, after Nier kind of figures out what Tanaka is doing or whereabouts he is, we get to Matsuda, who's been tailing Ryuk, and this is when he kind of jumps into the TV station like an idiot, basically legitimizing that this Kira power is real. So now, like after this, the price freaking jumps up sky high. And of course, this is when Tanaka kind of decides to put a date of expiration on the auction. So now we are kind of progressing to the final kind of third act, so to speak. And like at this point, you're like, okay, so Tanaka is not willing to use it like Kira did, especially with all the surveillance and the internet and stuff. Like, what is does he actually think that people will try to buy it? Obviously, they are willing to buy it. Which, like, are there that many dumb people in the world? Like, if they buy it, obviously the authorities are gonna be on their asses, you know. So, like, what is Tanaka's overall plan? And once he gets paid, like, that's another huge question. Like, did he think of that? Once he gets paid, they obviously can track it. And Nier brings up an interesting, a valid point. Like, did he really do anything wrong? Granted, it's almost like selling like a nuke on the black market, you know, highly bad stuff, like a weapon of mass destruction, so to speak, and he's selling it. So yeah, I would definitely consider that a crime, even though he didn't kill anybody directly. When Tanaka's just seeing this, the freaking price jump sky high, he's like, forget about Twitter. The government's are where to go now. Like I have now considered the government to be like the highest priority because they're going to give me the most money. I'm thinking, okay, so this kid is just in it for the money, I guess. So very, very twist coming in the future here. And then finally we get to kind of this big reveal. Like, okay, you know, a lot of times I don't really care for them to put realistic, like the real actual presidents in fiction. Like I usually prefer it to be just like a generic president character, you know, not like a George Bush or Obama or something like that. But that is the point in this chapter, I think, is to put the president of the United States, Donald Trump, in this manga with some very interesting social commentary. And of course, we get some very heavy social commentary about Japan and its debt crisis that's going on right now, which I had no idea about until this manga chapter. So of course, America's bidding on it, and a bunch of other countries are kind of just auctioning and trying to get their hands on it. But Tanaka's like, okay, well, let's narrow it down even more. Let's eliminate these other things. So, and they're gonna, like, all these presidents and everything, they're saying, oh, we're gonna buy it, but we're not gonna use it, or we're gonna buy it and we're only gonna use it for good. It's like, okay, well, like, why should we take your word for it? What makes, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you get Kira's Notebook, if a country gets Kira's Notebook, or the Death Note, like, they're gonna hold the world at ransom, you know? Like, you can't take their word for anything. So I'm thinking, is Tanaka really gonna just sell this to the highest bidder like that? I don't know, man. So it's like it's filled with tension because you don't know, or mystery because you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't really know what's in Tanaka's mind in terms of his overall plan. So you got all these countries basically arguing and fighting over it. And it's a lot of social commentary. Like, Japan's like, we'd rather have America have it than China, because if you know history, Japanese history especially, they haven't always had the best relations with China, and I think there's actually a lot of racism that goes on there between Japan and China, especially in the past. So everything's just building up to the sell date, and finally, like, we get this really great panel of Nier just like contemplating stacking these freaking cubes and eyeballs and just trying to figure things out. And I really love this panel, and I love the like kind of internal monologues that he's having with himself. And it's another thing that made me wish that we had more of it. But we get Ryuk, and he is called back from by another Shinigami to go to the Shinigami King. And of course, we don't see this, so that's another mystery that we're thinking, oh man, geez, man, like, there's only like 10 or 20 pages left to go on this. How are you going to wrap all this up? And especially with the next reveal that the United States the United States won the auction for the Death Note, and the method of transferring the money hasn't been revealed. So we got the mystery of, why did the king call Ryuk back, and are we going to find that out? And now it's like, okay, how is Tanaka planning on getting all of this bazillion dollars into like a bank account and not get caught? And I don't know, did anybody predict the outcome of this? Because I certainly did not. So we finally get to the reveal after some stuff with Nier, and the twist, if you want to call it that, is that essentially the gazillion dollars is to be spread among everybody who has a certain bank account aged 60 and under. And it's pretty ingenious because if that's gonna like really help Japan's economy, like that's gonna be like $10 million per person or something crazy like that. And it's like, dang, man, okay, so you're thinking Tanaka's like he wants to do this for selfish reasons, but this kid, this is a good kid. Oh my God, he's using the Death Note, which is used to kill people. He's using it to essentially save lives financially. And of course, that's going to pull Japan out of its debt crisis, and it does. It's like, 1 billion yen per person. And that's insane. I think that's like $10 million, something like that. So Tanaka's mom's busting. He's like, you got a Yotsuba bank account, right? And I love how, like, the world in this, like, the way it's portrayed is very, very interesting, because this is exactly what would happen with this mass hysteria and everybody wanting to open a bank account from this freaking bank after this announcement. But essentially Nier is like, oh, dang, man, I mean, there's nothing I can do about this. like there's no way I can track this guy down out of all these bank accounts. So he admits defeat, and I'm like, okay, man. So yeah, Nier's whole role in this was just to kind of have somebody on the other side of Tanaka just to figure things out, or try to figure out what Tanaka's plan is, to have somebody there, which is along the ride with us trying to figure out what the mystery is of what Tanaka's plan is. So Tanaka gives up ownership of the Death Note, and you may or may not have forgotten about Ryuk going to the king, or the Shinigami King, and so there's still that mystery of what he went there for. So Tanaka gives up ownership of the Death Note and tells Ryuk, never come here, come to me again under any circumstances. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why? Like, why do you care? You could just tell him to go away, couldn't you? But, and also, is Ryuk able to just walk up to somebody and tap him on the head with the Death Note? I don't know. Maybe that's because he asked him to. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with the rules, but whatever. So Tanaka, like, freaking the hero of Japan, basically. So we get to this awesome part in the manga where you get kind of a similar shot of Ryuk just like hovering over Trump, like he was hovering over Tanaka earlier, and he's passing over the Death Note, and Trump is like, and Ryuk's like, hey, just so you know, there's a new rule. And now we get the mystery solved of why Ryuk went to the Shinigami King, is because he was adding a new rule to the Death Note that anybody who sells and or buys the Death Note will die. And Trump's like, oh, fuck that shit. That's crazy. Speaking of, like his dialogue in here doesn't sound like Trump, which is interesting. Because, like I said earlier, I kind of like it when there's just a generic president, but there's an obvious message being told in this manga that's very anti-Trump, because it kind of shows how selfish he is, especially when he's like, well, I'm just gonna lie to everybody and tell them that I have the power of Kira, which would work, because who's any the wiser about it, So everybody's going to believe that Trump has the power of Kira, so he basically can rule the world with an iron fist now. And also, like, I don't know how I feel about these rules, especially when it comes to Tanaka, because he's obviously like he saved Japan, like economically. And so Ryuk's like, I should go warn Tanaka about this. Oh, but he told me not to ever bother him ever again. And then we just see Tanaka, just dead on the ground, man. It's such a disappointing sight to see. And then we see Ryuk had written his name in the notebook right under lights. I don't know why he didn't write Light Turner, though. I'm confused about that. Wink, wink. So, I don't know. Since it's a rule in the Death Note, did Ryuk have to write his name in it? Wouldn't he have just died since it's a rule of the Death Note? Since he sold it? I don't know. What do you think? Anyway, I thought this chapter was interesting. I thought that the social commentary was interesting, with like Donald Trump and the Japan economic crisis. And also there's a little bit of subtext for, you know, there's so many there's a lot of billionaires out there, and a billion is a huge number. And so if you spread like the wealth among a bunch of people, it's going to help the economy. And I feel like that's kind of the commentary going on around in this chapter. But that's kind of what I was perceiving it as. Obviously, you know, I really like to know what you guys thought of it in the comments below. I enjoyed the chapter for the most part. I do wish it was a mini series, so we can actually go into it a little bit more, because it kind of felt rushed and a little bit, I don't know, constrained by the constraints of the few pages that it did have to work with. So anyway, as always, this review has gone long enough, way longer than I anticipated. So as always, thanks for watching, and take it easy.